Thank you so much for joining us this Sunday morning. I know it's a little unusual to be in fellowship with each other through the computer screen, but I'm so happy that you could join us. I just wanted to say a few words about the coronavirus pandemic. Our hearts go out to everyone that is directly and indirectly affected by COVID-19. And I also want to reassure the All Souls community and our wider community that throughout the next week, the All Souls staff is still completely available through email or by telephone, and that you should look to our website and our Facebook pages for information on continued programming that will be moved online. Thank you so much, and welcome to this Sunday morning.
Thank you, Nazarene. Good morning, and welcome to this virtual worship service of All Souls Unitarian Church, a place where all souls feel a sense of welcome and belonging, and where we put love into action. I'm John Murphy, the worship associate in today's service. We gather as a covenantal religious community, holding many diverse beliefs, perspectives, and abilities. You're invited to share your full self and all your lived experiences with us. We will support you in your search for truth and meaning in your life. We intend to spark positive change within ourselves and in our communities, and we embrace the hope that we can help move the arc of the universe towards justice. I light a chalice this morning as a symbol of our faith tradition, a tradition that invites us to practice an authentic religion with integrity, a tradition that calls us to serve humankind with no agenda but service itself, a tradition that encourages us to search for and find meaning in our lives. Today, we are privileged to welcome Dr. Mark Belletini. He likes to go by Marco, actually, and that's a familiar name to him because that's what his grandparents called him when he was young. He has served three of our congregations, most recently the Columbus UU. In fact, he retired from there, but he has taught at both of our seminaries, and he has chaired the hymn book commission which produced the Gray Silver Book, and he wrote two books. One on devotional poetry, one on grief. So he's enjoying his retirement as an art collector, and he considers himself a bit of a photographer in Columbus. So I know you will enjoy hearing what Mark has to say. So as I was reflecting on thinking about finding depth in a spiritual activity that may not have considered inherently spiritual. In preparing for today, I took the opportunity to reflect on my own spiritual practices, or lack thereof, actually, and I would like to briefly share a thought that comes to mind. I had always considered spiritual practice and prayer to be more or less synonymous, and I have tended to view prayer in a negative connotation, a form of asking someone's God to suspend the laws of nature or to grant special dispensation that would be denied to others. Sort of a negative view, I would say. However, I will confess that when I consider all the unearned good fortune I've been blessed with, I am filled with a deep sense of gratitude and humility. In such a state of mind, I tend to be forgiving, not only of my own human imperfections and failings, but those of my fellow life travelers. I've heard it said that expressing gratitude is a form of Unitarian Universalist prayer, and I can easily acknowledge how that rings true for me. I suspect it does for many of you also. So I think the lesson for me is to not get hung up about whether spiritual practice and praying are the same or different, but to deliberately and regularly practice gratitude for the blessings in my life. In fact, I think I'm going to do just that for a while. Who knows? It may even make me a little less grumpy about all the things in this world that seem out of whack. Heaven knows I could probably do well to chill out a little bit. And well, okay, let's just go ahead and say that I'm adopting a spiritual practice in my everyday living.
Good morning. I'm Mark Belletini, Marco. And I know that this coming week is the beginning of spring, technically, the equinox. So I offer you these words that will lead us into silence. And if you wish, since we are bodies, words can take other forms besides speech. And I look at the flowers coming up now in the spring, and I think of the hands in front of me, which are like buds when I close them, but which open slowly, no different than a crocus or a daffodil. So as I speak or in the silence afterward, feel free to do that. Feel free to feel what it feels like to have a fist that all of a sudden opens up. So in a few days, the season of spring will officially dawn, or love. Right here in Indiana and Ohio, and Alaska and Norway and Quebec, even if we admit that it's not going to dawn in Australia or Angola, or Chile and Patagonia, where it's going to be the autumn equinox. But here, the green shoots are pushing through the very wet loam. The crocuses are daring to peek out. But all the usual sources of anxiety are here also. The noisy gong and clashing cymbals of politics, the unpredictability of a pervasive and dangerous illness, the turns and twists in our personal lives, the sorrows and the surprises, the scurrying and the worrying, the coming days of isolation and self-care. But the spring earth does not notice such things, nor does it come up with philosophies or concerns. The crocus rises up simply because it cannot do otherwise. It does what crocuses do. It will rise even through the last snow flurries. It will open fragile petals even if the rain falls heavy. And the iris too will climb toward the clouds, doing what irises do. And the dandelion will spread its bitter green leaves, no matter what happens in our lives or in our world. No matter that people like my grandmother used to go into the highway, the edges of the highway where there were dandelions growing, and knife them out and put them in a basket and serve them in a salad later on, they don't notice that we're doing that. The flowers of spring burst through reliably. We can say hallelujah, amen. But nature is also us. We are no less nature than the crocuses. May we be inspired by the flowers that rise up to also rise and risk and dare and blossom in the ways we can during this difficult time. May we be the rest of nature in northern spring, rising and blossoming as the flowers do it, completely, unself-consciously, in silence. May we be at peace with each other, even though we're far apart. Amen.
Ordinarily, we would do a story for all ages at this point in the service, and so we are going to do a story for all ages. 150 years ago, there was a very wise man named Nanin. Nanin was the abbot, that is, the leader of a community of people who practiced the religion of Zen Buddhism. A young teacher from the United States visited Nanin. The teacher wanted to know everything about Zen. He had read many books about it and was glad to meet the abbot, Nanin, whom he asked to tell him all about the practice of Zen Buddhism. The abbot said, "Let's have some tea together first, shall we?" The teacher agreed, but was clearly impatient to get started. They sat down. The abbot took the teapot on the table before them and started to pour tea into his visitor's cup. He continued to pour and pour until the cup overflowed, and he still poured. The guest raised his hands and asked, "What are you doing? It's overflowing." The abbot said, "So are you. You came here to learn from me, you said, but you are filled with what you already read and are impatient. You need to be empty in order to be filled, just the right amount." At that moment, the teacher suddenly understood the nature of Zen and became quiet.
This morning, I'm going to offer you a few readings, texts, that will join with the story of the Zen abbot in unfolding what I want to say in the sermon. The first texts are 2 lines from a 31-year-old artist, Jordan Castile. Her work is now up in the new museum in New York City, which is an amazing achievement for somebody 31 years old. Jordan Castile paints only African-American people, especially large male figure paintings. You might want to look her up afterward and read the recent New York Times article about her if you wish to know more about her. These 2 readings come from the years 2020 and 2018. John will read them.
Jordan writes, "Empathy is something that I have been really raised thinking about. What does it mean to come outside of oneself into someone else and understand the common grounds or even the differences that might exist? Being an empathic observer in the world will always be valuable, whatever your practice may be."
The second text is from an essay by the late Australian artist, Brett Whiteley, whose work encompasses both figure drawing as well as abstract expressionism, and he's very highly regarded in Australia.
Brett writes, "Drawing is the art of being, able to leave an accurate record of the experience of what one isn't and what one doesn't know."
Let me name the situation I think we are all in first. I would like my hopefully helpful words on spiritual practice to blossom within an entirely honest context. It's been a rough winter, and not just because of the odd roller coaster weather or political conflicts, insults, and too many talking heads. The COVID-19 virus is in every headline now. I certainly worry for people that I love, especially those in highly hit areas like Seattle, for example. And my friend Kerrigan, who lives in Milan, is confined to quarters for at least 3 weeks now. My ancestral city of Modena in Italy is a complete ghost town. And many Unitarian Universalist congregations, including this one, are trying to figure out what it means to have video services. We are clearly living right now in strange and dire times. But this morning, I would like to point out to us all that such dire times are hardly some new development. I am 70 years old, and in my life, I have known many such events. The Cuban Missile Crisis when I was a child, and my brother and I tried to imagine what it would be like to be destroyed in a nuclear bomb. The Vietnam War, wars in the Middle East and elsewhere where I lost friends, slaughters in Central Africa, which tore nations apart. Natural events like the Loma Prieta quake in California, which I experienced myself with great horror. The continuing racial and class-based lack of access to any power. All the school and other shootings in recent years, so many others. All of these times were dire times, as far as I'm concerned. And for me, even more personally, the AIDS crisis was the most dire time in my life, a period of around 10 years, when I did memorial services for pretty much everyone that I loved. No, dire times like this are not new. This is a strange one, to be sure, and it's worldwide, but even worldwide is not new, as survivors of World War II will be glad to tell you. And many of you have lived yourselves through other horrific events that I haven't mentioned, some in your own lives, some personal, and others universal. And yet, here we are, you and I. Together, we're in this room, listening to a recording of my voice, whatever room you're in. We have lived through it all to this very moment. I don't know about you, but I needed a lot of help to get through those dire times in the past. Help from my deepest heart, help healing, help to go forward one step at a time. I needed a practice to strengthen myself, not just to face those dire days, but also to live my life more freely every day in between the dire times. Such practices are called spiritual practices in our day, but decades back, they were often called devotional practices. My great mentor in my life, the late Reverend Harry Schofield, used to say to me, Marco, if you don't pay attention to your devotional life, you will dry up and blow away like a fragile autumn leaf in a great storm. I agreed with him then, and still do. And please don't be alarmed by the antique phrase, devotional life. A devotional life can be many things, some sounding traditionally sacred indeed, others sounding very secular. Harry's use of the word devotional is just an older generational term for our more contemporary word spiritual. I'm thinking right now, especially of the recent series of services here at All Souls during this last month, which have addressed a variety of such practices. Right now, regarding the present crisis, we may find help practices that keep any panic we feel from excusing impulsive and bravado decisions. Practices that let us empty ourselves of misinformation, overflowing like tea in the cup of the Zen story, so that we might listen, really listen to the sober facts that are out there and not announce rumors and conspiracy theories, patiently letting the beleaguered medical people outline what they daily discover. Now, when I talk about spiritual practice, you know, for some people it's meditation, for other people it's prayer, for some people it's yoga. There's a whole variety of things, reading, journaling, like our 19th century ancestors used to do. But I personally am never much concerned to attach a lot of theology to any of these practices, or at least not to make it central to the practice. To get into free-for-alls, whether I have to believe or disbelieve in some doctrine in order to devote myself to meditation or acts of compassion down at the soup kitchen, is putting the cart way before the horse. But I agree with my mentor, Harry. It's possible for even rather strong, intelligent, resourceful, and self-determined people with a lot of privilege to dry up and blow away in such a crisis, unless we each deliberately set times aside for spiritual restoration. And I need also here to point out that the COVID-19 crisis we are facing is not like the AIDS crisis of the 80s in most ways. One, it is not a certain death for everyone afflicted, like it certainly was back in the 1980s and 1990s. And two, nobody now has had to stage die-ins, organize demonstrations of rage, or spend 10 angry years to get even the general population to even notice that people were dying. Our friends, our children, our parents. With this virus, so much has happened in just 2 weeks, my head is spinning. Pandemic specialists are already working on things that may lead to vaccines for the present virus without the need for a single protest of outrage in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral or a pharmacological industry building, demanding a cure with rage. Now, here's what I want to tell you about the devotional or spiritual practice that helped me through that dire time. During the awful AIDS crisis, I attended a gay men's life drawing group every single week on Tuesday night. A marvelous man named Mark Chester ran the group from his mostly unfurnished flat in San Francisco. Usually there were anywhere from 7 to 12 folks drawing each night. We would ask the model to sit or stand or fold up like a rosebud, depending on the character and capacities of his body. We tried a variety of poses each and every evening, dramatic, like a classic statue perhaps, or as ordinary as somebody just lounging in a chair and staring off into space. We played with the lighting to make things more vivid, or draped material around the model to make things more neutral. We often put on supportive music as we drew, some Pat Metheny, or Philip Glass, or Aaron Copland. In this group, we were of tremendously varying skills. Some had written books on drawing that were used in colleges. Others had never drawn anything in their life before, and they just wanted to learn. We were of varying ages, origins, ethnicities, abilities, and backgrounds. It was, however, mostly a gay men's group, although women now and then drew with us. We drew with charcoal and pen and pencil and crayons and Conte and oil pastels and pen and pencil, and even eventually, as they developed, on iPads. We drew short poses to begin, 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, and then moved on to 10-minute or at most 20-minute poses. We drew quickly, focused. We smudged our faces, our hands, got chalk on our trousers, put accidental fingerprints on our finished drawings. We laughed sometimes. We talked about our lives during the breaks. We draped our arms around each other in sympathy since so many of our friends were dying. We embraced hello and we kissed goodbye. We all admitted to feeling restored at the end of the evening. No matter what has claimed our time that day or week before, no matter how broken our hearts might have been, or how overflowing at times, or how dull, or how exhausted, we were all restored. Life drawing with friends is an extraordinary spiritual practice, even if it is, I admit, rather atypical. But it was a helpful spiritual exercise and it got me through it. Oh, it's not magical or anything. There are no sudden downdrafts of doves or flashes of light from somewhere else. But we arrived dried up and we left refreshed, strengthened, and sometimes even transformed. Now, for many people, it may be hard to understand how life drawing might stretch the spirit, restore the broken places of the heart, and then ground that heart in a more rapturous reality of the world. But I will explain that in a minute, and we're going to take a little break to pause with some music. So now let me try to explain how my experience with drawing is a spiritual or devotional practice by telling you about the man who first formally taught me to draw when I was at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. His name was Kichui Usui. He was a tall man with a slight stoop, I remember, as if he wasn't really sure he should be quite that tall. He had recently arrived from Japan. His English was sometimes halting and accented, especially around the difficult L and R sounds. I confess that I did not always find him easy to understand. But despite the language limitations, I learned not only to draw from this man, but I learned a lot about the possibilities of an unusual devotional life. There are three things, he said, over and over he said these things, that one must do every single time one draws from life. The three things were, 1, look at the model. 2, fill the page. 3, draw with your whole body. Let me tackle each of them in turn. Look at the model. That seems obvious, doesn't it? You're doing life drawing. You're drawing the model, after all, not yourself. You are drawing somebody outside of you, different than you, not you. If you look at the page you are working on all the time, you're not looking at the model. The time this became very clear to me was when in my drawing group in San Francisco, a model was a person of small stature, commonly called in English a dwarf. That night, each of us struggled to draw the model like we had no other night. Each of us in the group tended to lengthen the lines of the model, making him look more like ourselves. Each of us being taller than him by some considerable inches. The different proportions of the limbs, the different look of the hands, we all had to work very hard to see what we were seeing. Our own default and faulty understanding of what a human body should look like got in the way. There is in life, as well as in life drawing, a tendency to normalize according to our own highly idiosyncratic understanding of what the word normal means. In life drawing, it is hard to resist making this skinny thicker, the thicker skinnier, or to give the large nose some unscheduled plastic surgery. In life drawing, it's very much like life. It's hard not to see others as being like ourselves instead of being like themselves. As artist Brett Whiteley said, drawing is the art of being able to leave an accurate record of what one is not. Or as Jordan Castillo asks, what does it mean to come outside of oneself into someone else and understand both the common grounds and the very real differences? I find a marked tendency in most every conversation I have ever been in to move toward the apparently similar without ever stopping to check whether I am simply assuming these similarities. Life drawing has taught me to be careful. It has taught me that it's dangerous always to make assumptions or to find in either similarity or difference any reason to jump to judgment. Truly fine life drawing has to be non-judgmental and non-comparative. I say that truly fine living spiritual living, if you will, is the same way. Each person, no matter their size, color, shape, or texture, possesses a beauty unique to them. No one need deny who we are in order to appear part of any assumed herd dictated by the media and advertising worlds about how we should look. To look at the model means to practice our great Unitarian Universalist principle of the worth and dignity of every human person in the flesh. It's to empty our minds of all overflowing expectations and opinions, like the overflowing cup in the Zen story. By treating the model as a sovereign person different from me, I become vulnerable to the world as it is, not as my uncritical and devotion-free self might like it to be. And during this time of the virus, each of us will confront wildly different versions of what this virus will do to individuals who are suffering with it, even perhaps some of us. Each story is what it is, unique, and not part of some fool category of what must be happening to everyone. Look at the person you are relating to, the model, if you will, that you may not be drawing, but you have to honestly see in order for you to respond honestly. Secondly, fill the page. Mr. Usui told us to stop drawing little crab drawings in the center of the page, these large pads that we drew on. The pencil in your hand is a gift, he said. The paper in your pad is a gift. Use your gifts fully. Fill the whole page with your drawing. Do not waste paper. And let your pencil rest loosely in your hand. Stop trying to control everything by holding it so tight and producing a very small drawing. This advice makes sense in living a spiritual life as well as in life drawing. The tendency to hold tight and to be controlling is something I have to fight off all the time. The body I was drawing was not small, but way larger than the paper. And yet I would try to control the image by refusing to let it flow onto the page, so some of it might even be off the edge and not visible. That I have control over anything is an illusion. As the tight crab drawing on a large page betrays the liveliness of the living model we were drawing, so my default need to be in control betrays the liveliness and sovereignty of everyone around me. Habits of control, which I might use to deny my fears of failing, are simply illusions. And as psychologist David Richo puts it, actually he says Rico, I think. As psychologist David Richo puts it, living a spiritual life is to do whatever you need to do to shed all of your illusions. If I think of myself as an individual first and not as an individual in community first, I am also living an illusion. My selfhood, my humanhood is so inextricably linked to others that to speak of myself without also speaking of my friends, family, culture, religious feelings, geography, losses and joys is to flirt with dishonesty. I am the fullness of all my experiences, all my relationships, all of my history, both joyful and devastating. To fill the page means not to huddle in the center, but to move to the edge. For a spiritual community like this one, All Souls, before the virus changed things and separated us, it's always been an invitation for us to go to the edge, not to be clustering in the center as if we were just a club. We are a living community with ever open doors, not some abstract umbrella was just happened to open over a pack of individuals with a variety of spiritual philosophies. And so with this era of the virus, many of us may have to isolate for a while, but we still need to fill the page of our lives. Phone calls, texts, emails, snail mail even, social media will help to keep ourselves from feeling like small, isolated sketches in the middle of a much larger page of life. Fill the page. Lastly, draw with your whole body, Mr. Usui said. He would grab his shoulder when he said that, swinging his arm as if that was the pivot of a compass. He told us that the hand was for grasping the pencil, but the drawing itself was for the whole body, our torso, our arms, the tilt of our head, the slant of the waist. We were one whole, not a bunch of pieces strung together like a marionette. What this means to me in my larger life, beyond the art room, is that my life is not just the whole of my friends, heritage, relationships, heartbreak, intelligence, and experience. It's also acknowledging that my whole body lies beyond the edge of my own skin, in my complete interconnection with absolutely everything that is. The dogs on the street, the buds in the trees, the stars in the sky are one with my every breath. We exist together or not at all. The people in Kuala Lumpur or Wuhan or Melbourne or Milan are all woven in my life too. All that is not me makes all that is me possible. In living my everyday life, I need to use this, my larger and whole body, outside my skin, to do the work of my spiritual life. For example, I can tell my own story, but I cannot tell someone else's story for them. If a woman is sitting in a doorway, begging for money or food, you've seen this, there is nothing healthy about me imagining what her story is. Drugs, mental illness, a scam. I have no way of knowing unless I get to know her, which most of the time I cannot take the time to do, although I have sometimes. Living with my whole body, however, is not to explain her away, slot her in some category I don't know anything about, but simply to be a witness to her reality and acknowledge that she is as much a part of the world as me, and that her life means as much to her as my life means to me. Living with my whole body means to acknowledge that she is part of the body of the world as much as I am. It's not about whether I give her money or do not give her money, mind you. It's about not pretending she's not there. She is. I've heard such racialized nonsense about the people who are not me. The Chinese from Wuhan, a city something like the Detroit of China. There's no way I can draw with my whole body if ignorance, racial assumptions, and nasty stereotypes cut off a whole group of people from my larger body. The physicians and scientists of the universities there are doing a lot more right now than the bumblers in this country urging us not to take this seriously. When I face this crisis in the coming weeks, I have to do it with my whole body, beyond my skin. I have to focus on the wholeness of it and not finding people to blame. Epidemiologists have been predicting outbreaks of viral events like this for the last 20 years. This, in many ways, is not a surprise. So here's the summary. To struggle to see another face without me hanging my own face on it. First, that's the first step. to give up thinking I can control things as if magically fending off my fears of failure. That's the second step. To begin to find, recognize, and embrace my total interdependence with all that exists outside of my skin. That's the third step. These are the three struggles of a devotional life, whatever form it might take: meditation, music, or like me, drawing, or now photography. As Jordan Castile said, being an empathic observer in this world will always be valuable, no matter what your practice is. Kichui Usui taught me how to draw during the Vietnam War and all those famous assassinations. It was a world not unlike our own present world, really. But Mr. Usui and Mark Chester and his life drawing group got me through those days of unending grief intact, my spirit strengthened by the devotional practice of drawing. Mr. Usui died a few years ago. Wouldn't you know it, he was a Unitarian Universalist. The minister in Rochester, Michigan, conducted his memorial, and she called me up because she knew I'd gone to school there and probably knew him. And what I told you today is pretty much what I told her. Mr. Usui is the man who, long before Harry Schofield, taught me that not to have a devotional life is very risky indeed. He taught me a very different way than Harry Schofield, but in some ways, they taught me things that are remarkably similar. I thank Mr. Usui for the gift he gave me, which continues to strengthen me in this present hour, this dire time of the virus. May you too be strengthened by your spiritual practices, your devotional practices, your gratitude, your love. So be it.
So now is the time in the service where we would ordinarily provide an offertory testimonial by worship associate and pass the plate. Obviously, we can't do that today and for several Sundays. So I want to suggest ways that you can continue to support All Souls financially, which is, of course, important during this rough time. First of all, if you ordinarily drop something in the collection plate, you can consider putting it in an envelope and mailing it to the church office. Additionally, we will supply, or there is already, if you know, the website for the church, allsoulsindy.org. And on that website, there are buttons, if you like, that you can click that say either pledge or donate. If you have not turned in your pledge card yet, I would encourage you to either use that link, which is very convenient, or to certainly get your pledge card mailed into the church office. We're trying to wrap up the pledge drive, and so any help you can give along that line would be very helpful. Also, when you click on donate, it gives you the option of using PayPal. So if you have a PayPal account set up, you can donate directly. You can also set up a Faithify account and donate through your bank card or your debit card or whatever you ordinarily use. So I would encourage all of us to use those methods to continue to support All Souls during this difficult time. The needs of the church do not go away just because we have the COVID-19 virus. In fact, these are unusual times. So please consider helping the church in one of these ways. If you have questions about how you can get your financial support to the church, please don't hesitate to call the church office.
Hear these words by Jamie Twerkovsky. Conversations will not be canceled. Relationships will not be canceled. Love will not be canceled. Songs will not be canceled. Reading will not be canceled. Self-care will not be canceled. Hope will not be canceled. May we lean now into all the good that remains. So be it. Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us through this virtual service. I want to affirm everyone that has come this morning and continue to be in fellowship with each other. Even though sometimes the technology can be a little bit iffy to deal with, I am so grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you.